Most families bury their secrets with the body, but my sister Meredith decided to put ours on the docket. I stood in the back of the Merrow County Probate Court, wearing a blazer that cost $40, watching her perform grief like it was a gala event. She wanted the estate, the house, and the satisfaction of finally erasing me. She thought she had already won, but she hadn't noticed the man in the black suit sitting behind her. The fluorescent lights of the supply room in the Harrow Glen Municipal Building always hummed at a frequency that made my teeth ache. It was a small, windowless box where I spent 2 hours of every workday cataloging invoices for the City Parks Department, and I loved it. I loved the boredom. I loved the predictability. I loved that the biggest crisis I had faced in the last 3 years was a misfiled order for cedar mulch. At 33 years old, I had successfully curated a life that was invisible. I drove a silver sedan that blended into the asphalt. I rented a second-floor apartment in a complex where neighbors nodded but never asked questions. I paid my bills on the first of the month, every month, to anyone watching. I was Anna Bell, the quiet administrative assistant who brought bagels on Fridays and never went to happy hour. They didn't know that this boredom was a fortress. They didn't know I had built these walls brick by brick to keep the chaos of my family from flooding back in. Then the phone rang. It wasn't my cell phone. It was the landline on the desk, the one that only rang for inter-office memos. When I picked it up, the voice on the other end wasn't my boss, Mr. Henderson. It was a woman with a clipped, professional tone that sounded like expensive stationery. "Anna Bell," she asked. "Speaking." I said, "This is the intake nurse at St. Jude's Medical Center. I am calling regarding your father, Robert Bell." The air in the supply room seemed to vanish. I hadn't spoken to my father in 11 months. The last time we spoke, he had been drunk, weeping about legacy, and I had hung up because I couldn't bear to hear him sound so small. "Is he okay?" I asked, though I knew the answer before the words left my mouth. People don't call the estranged daughter on a work line for minor injuries. "I am very sorry," she said. "He passed away 40 minutes ago. Massive cardiac arrest." It was very quick. I stared at the stack of invoices. Invoice number 4022 for 6 bags of grass seed. "Is anyone else there?" I asked. "Your sister is here," the nurse said. "She is handling the arrangements. She told us not to call you, but you are listed as the secondary emergency contact, and protocol requires we notify you. Of course she is there. Of course she told you not to call. Thank you," I said. My voice sounded mechanical. "I will be there soon." I hung up the phone and stood there for a long time. I expected to cry. I expected to feel that crushing, cinematic grief that people talk about in books. Instead, I felt a cold, sharp panic. My father was dead, which meant the buffer between me and Meredith was gone. The truce of silence I had maintained for years was over. I wasn't just grieving a parent, I was grieving my safety. The funeral took place 3 days later in the rain, because God has a sense of humor and understands pathetic fallacy. The service was held at the Holy Trinity Cathedral, a massive stone structure that my father hadn't stepped foot in for 20 years. But it was the kind of place Meredith liked. It had gravitas. It looked good in photos. I arrived 20 minutes early, parking my silver sedan between 2 black luxury SUVs that cost more than my annual salary. I checked my reflection in the rear-view mirror. My black dress was simple, bought off the rack at a department store the day before. It fit, but it didn't scream money. It whispered survival. Walking up the stone steps, I felt the eyes of the attendees. These were my father's business associates, the country club crowd, the people who had watched the Bell family from a distance for decades. They knew the rumors. They knew about the scandal 4 years ago, the accusations that I had been unstable, the messy public argument at the charity gala, the way Meredith had stepped in to smooth everything over while I was quietly escorted out. They remembered the narrative Meredith had written for me, Anna the problem, Anna the volatile one. I kept my head up. I had practiced this walk in my living room. Shoulders back, eyes forward, do not engage. Inside, the air smelled of lilies and old floor wax. The casket was closed, resting at the front of the altar like a mahogany altar to regret. And there, Standing in the receiving line was Meredith. She was perfect. There was no other word for it. She wore a black dress that was tailored to within a millimeter of her life. Her blonde hair swept back in a severe, elegant chignon. She was holding the hand of her husband, Richard, who looked appropriately solemn and handsome, like an accessory she had picked out to match the drapes. When she saw me, her expression didn't change. A lesser woman might have frowned or looked surprised. Meredith just adjusted her gaze. Focusing on me with the intensity of a laser sight, she stepped away from the line and walked toward me. Her heels clicked on the marble floor. A rhythmic countdown. "Anna," she said. Her voice was low, modulated to project intimacy without warmth. "You came?" I looked at her. She was 36, 3 years older than me, but she looked like she had been born 40. He was my father, too. "Meredith?" I said. She sighed, a tiny sound that suggested I was already exhausting her. "I wasn't sure if you would want to be here." Considering the history, I didn't take the bait. The history she was referring to was a minefield she had planted herself. "I'm just here to pay my respects." I said, "I'll stay in the back. I won't cause a scene." Meredith stepped closer. She smelled of expensive perfume and breath mints. She placed a hand on my forearm, her fingers gripping just tight enough to bruise. To anyone watching, it looked like a comforting, sisterly touch. To me, it felt like a handcuff. "See that you don't," she whispered. Her lips barely moved. "We have investors here, people who matters. If you embarrass us again, Anna, if you make this about you, I will have security remove you before you can take a breath. Do you understand?" I looked at her hand on my arm. I remembered the last time she had touched me like this, pushing me toward a door while telling everyone I was having a mental health episode. "I understand." I said, "Good," she said, releasing me and smoothing the fabric of my sleeve as if she were wiping away dust. "Go sit down. Row 10 is reserved for distant family." She turned and walked back to her husband, slipping her arm through his. I watched her go, feeling the old familiar heat rising in my chest, the mixture of shame and rage that I had spent years trying to suppress. She hadn't just organized a funeral, she had organized a stage play, and I was the villain she needed in the wings to make her heroism shine brighter. I sat in row 10. I listened to the eulogies. People spoke about my father's business acumen, his generosity, his sharp wit. No one spoke about his drinking. No one spoke about the way he used to sit in his study in the dark, staring at the wall, terrified of his own financial shadows. No one spoke about the fact that he had called me 3 times in the last month, leaving voicemails I hadn't returned because I was afraid they were traps set by Meredith. I cried, but I did it quietly, letting the tears soak into the collar of my dress. I cried for the father I wanted, not the one I lost. The ambush came 2 days after the funeral. I was back at work, trying to lose myself in the rhythm of data entry, when I received an email on my personal account. The subject line was simply, "Notice of Hearing, Estate of Robert Bell." I opened it, my hand hovering over the mouse. It was a notification from the Merrow County Probate Court. A hearing had been scheduled for the following Tuesday. I frowned. This was too fast. Probate usually took weeks to initiate. I scrolled down and read the attachment, and the floor dropped out from under me. Meredith hadn't just filed for probate. She had filed a petition to contest the validity of the will and to challenge my standing as a beneficiary. The legal language was dense, but the accusations were clear. Undue influence, financial instability, estrangement with hostile intent. She was claiming that I had manipulated our father in his final months to alter his estate plan. She was claiming that I was mentally unfit to manage assets. She was asking the court to grant her full executorship and to place any inheritance I might receive into a controlled guardianship, overseen by her. I sat back in my chair, the blood draining from my face. She wasn't just trying to take the money. She was trying to legally certify that I was crazy. She was trying to finish what she started 4 years ago. I needed a lawyer. I found a man named Samuel Levi. He wasn't a high-powered corporate shark like the ones Meredith retained. He was a general practice attorney with an office above a dry cleaner in downtown Harrow Glen, but he had a reputation for being honest. I met him the next morning. He was a disheveled man in his 50s with coffee stains on his tie and a desk buried under stacks of manila folders. He read the summary I had printed out, pushing his glasses up his nose. "This is aggressive," he said, tapping the paper. "Extremely aggressive. Your sister isn't waiting for the will to be read. She is preemptively striking. She's filing an injunction to freeze any distribution before it even starts." "Can she do that?" I asked. "She can file whatever she wants." Samuel said, "Whether a judge buys it is a different story, but she has money, and she has a narrative. She is painting a picture of you as a volatile risk. Tell me, Anna, is there any truth to this? Did you influence your father's will?" "I haven't seen his will." I said, "I haven't seen my father in almost a year. That's the point. How could I influence him if I wasn't there?" Samuel nodded. "That is a good point. But looking at this, she's going to argue that you exerted influence remotely. Emails, phone calls. She mentions emotional blackmail in the filing. It's a lie." I said, "All of it." Samuel sighed. "In probate court, the truth is often less important than the documentation. We need to see the will. We need to know what she is so afraid of." We found out the next day. The estate attorney, a man named Mr. Gelson, who had worked for my father for 30 years, set up a conference call. He wouldn't meet in person, which was the first red flag. I sat in Samuel's office, listening to Gelson's voice crackle over the speakerphone. "The last will and testament of Robert Bell is complex," Gelson said. He sounded tired. He did not opt for a simple division of assets. Instead, the entire estate, the house, the investment accounts, the intellectual property is to be placed into the Bell Family Trust. "And who is the trustee?" Samuel asked. "There are co-trustees," Gelson said, "Meredith Bell, and an independent fiduciary appointed by the court." I heard Meredith's sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. She was on the call, too, presumably from her pristine living room. Independent Meredith said, "That was never discussed. Dad told me I would have control. The will was updated 6 months ago," Gelson said. "But that is not the most significant change. The trust has strict distribution triggers. The beneficiaries are Meredith Bell and Anna Bell. Equal shares." Samuel asked. "No," Gelson said. "The split is 60-40 in favor of Meredith." I felt a wave of relief. That was fine. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted to be left alone. "However," Gelson continued, his voice dropping an octave, "there is a stipulation. The 40% designated for Anna Bell is not subject to the discretion of the family trustee. It is to be released immediately upon the clearing of probate, provided she is not currently incarcerated or institutionalized. Furthermore, the will designates Anna Bell as the sole beneficiary of the terrifyingly specific asset listed as the Phoenix Archive." There was a silence on the line. "What is the Phoenix Archive?" Meredith asked. Her voice was ice cold. "I don't know," Gelson admitted. "It is listed as a physical collection of documents and a safe deposit box key. But here is the kicker. If the will is contested by any beneficiary, a poison pill clause is activated, the entire estate freezes, and a full forensic audit of the previous 5 years of family finances is automatically triggered." The silence this time was heavy. It was the sound of oxygen leaving a room. Meredith spoke first. "That is ridiculous. Dad would never write that. He trusted me. This is obviously a forgery. Anna must have gotten to him." "I didn't do anything," I said into the speakerphone. "You're a liar," Meredith spat. "You manipulated a sick old man. You think you can just walk back in and take 40%. After what you did to this family, Ms. Bell." "Please," Samuel said calmly. "I'm filing the contest," Meredith said. "I don't care about the poison pill. I have nothing to hide. But I will not let her destroy my father's legacy." The line clicked dead. Meredith had hung up. Samuel looked at me. "Well," he said, "that was interesting." "What does it mean?" I asked. "It means your father expected a fight," Samuel said, "and he set a trap. The question is, who is the trap for? The war began 24 hours later. I woke up to a notification on my phone. A local news blog, the Harrow Glen Observer, had posted a story. Wealthy heiress fights to protect father's legacy from troubled sister. I felt the nausea curl in my stomach. I opened the article. It was a masterpiece of spin. It didn't name me explicitly, but it gave enough details that anyone who knew the Bells would know exactly who it was. It described a distraught daughter trying to save the family estate from a sibling with a documented history of instability and financial mismanagement. It quoted close family friends. It quoted a source close to the estate. Meredith had hired a PR consultant. I knew this because the phrasing was too perfect. It hit every key word that scares people: unstable, greedy, manipulative. I went to work, but I kept my head down. I felt like everyone was looking at me. Did they know? Did my boss know? My phone buzzed with texts from numbers I didn't recognize. You should be ashamed of yourself. Leave your sister alone. Gold digger. Meredith had unleashed the flying monkeys. It was a strategy she had used before. Isolate the target. Make them feel small. Make them feel like the whole world is against them so they give up just to make the noise stop. I sat in my car during my lunch break, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive to her house and scream in her face. But I knew that was exactly what she wanted. She wanted me to react. She wanted me to look crazy. I took a deep breath. Do not react. Do not engage. Stay the course. That evening, I started sorting through the box of condolence items Meredith had graciously allowed me to have, mostly cheap trinkets and generic cards that had been sent to the funeral home but didn't make the cut for her display. I was sifting through a stack of mass cards when I found it. It wasn't a condolence card. It was a plain white envelope with my name handwritten on the front. The handwriting was shaky, spiderwebbed with tremors, but I recognized it instantly. It was my father's handwriting. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of yellow legal pad paper. It looked like it had been written in a hurry. The ink was smeared in places. Anna, if you are reading this, I finally ran out of time. I am sorry. I was a coward for too long. I let her run things because it was easier, and then because I was scared. The money isn't just money. It's leverage. She has leveraged everything. The trust is the only way out. I built it to break the cycle. She will try to stop it. She will try to destroy you to stop it. The letter ended abruptly there, as if he had been interrupted, but at the bottom of the page, scrawled in thick, dark strokes, were two final lines: do not settle. If she takes it to court, watch who walks in. I stared at the paper. Watch who walks in. What did that mean? Who was he talking about? I folded the letter and put it in my pocket, for the first time since the phone call. I didn't feel just fear. I felt a spark of curiosity. My father had been afraid of Meredith. He had been afraid of his own golden child. Why I needed to understand the administrative anomalies Samuel had mentioned. So I agreed to meet with the court-appointed probate mediator. His name was Mr. Vance, and we met at a diner on the edge of town, far away from the country club district. Vance was a small man with nervous eyes. He didn't touch his coffee. "Ms. Bell," he said, keeping his voice low. "I shouldn't be meeting you without counsel present, but there are things happening with the filing that are irregular. Irregular how I asked. The trust documents," he said. "Since the moment your father died, there have been digital requests to access the administrative logs, not from the bank, from an external IP address. Someone is trying to see the transaction history before the audit starts." "Meredith?" I asked. "I can't say for sure," Vance said, "but the requests are using an authorization code that belongs to a trustee. However, the trustee hasn't been officially seated yet." He leaned in closer. "Your sister's lawyers are pushing for an emergency injunction to bypass the audit. They are claiming that the audit would damage the value of the estate businesses. That is a very unusual argument. Usually, beneficiaries want an audit to ensure they get every penny. Why would a beneficiary want to stop an audit because she's hiding something?" I said, Vance nodded slowly. That is my suspicion. But Ms. Bell, you need to be careful. The people pushing this, they aren't just local attorneys. The paperwork is being filed by a firm in Chicago that specializes in high-risk asset recovery. They are heavy hitters. If they are involved, the stakes are much higher than a simple inheritance dispute. He looked at his watch. I have to go. But keep your eyes open. If you see anything, any documents, any accounts that don't look right, send them to your lawyer immediately. The window to catch them is closing. The week dragged on. The tension was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders. I checked my bank account every day. Terrified Meredith would find a way to freeze my own meager funds. I checked my locks 3 times before bed. Friday afternoon arrived. I was at the office, collating a report on playground equipment maintenance. The office was quiet. Mr. Henderson was in his office with the door open. The front door chimed. I looked up. A man walked in. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a cheap windbreaker and holding a manila envelope. He didn't look like a resident coming to complain about a pothole. He looked like a professional. Anna Bell, he called out. The office went silent. My coworkers. Linda from accounting, Mike from zoning stopped typing. They all looked at me. I stood up slowly. Yes. The man walked over to my desk. He didn't smile. He tossed the envelope onto my keyboard. It landed with a heavy slap. You've been served, he said. He turned and walked out. I stared at the envelope. I didn't have to open it to know what it was. It was the formal lawsuit. Meredith had done it. She had sued her own sister. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. The humiliation was total. To be served at work, in front of everyone, it was a calculated move. It was designed to shame me. I looked up and saw Mr. Henderson standing in his doorway. He was a good man, a kind man, but he looked uncomfortable. He looked at the envelope, then at me. Anna, he said softly. I swallowed hard. I'm sorry. Mr. Henderson, it's a family matter. He nodded, but he didn't go back to his desk. He walked over to me, keeping his voice low so the others couldn't hear. I know you've had troubles in the past. Anna, you've been a model employee here, but the city has strict policies about legal entanglements that might reflect on the department. He paused, looking pained. Is there anything you need to disclose? Anything that's going to come out in the papers? I had a reporter call the main line this morning asking about our hiring practices. My heart stopped. She had called the press on my job. She was trying to get me fired. No, I said. My voice shook. No, Mr. Henderson, there is nothing. This is just a dispute over a will. It has nothing to do with my work. He looked at me for a long moment. He wanted to believe me. I could see it in his eyes. But I could also see the fear. He was a bureaucrat. He liked order, and I was bringing chaos. Okay, he said finally. Let's hope it stays that way. Take the rest of the day. Anna, it wasn't a suggestion. I grabbed my purse and the envelope. I walked out of the office, feeling the eyes of my coworkers burning into my back. I knew what they were thinking. They were thinking that maybe the rumors were true. Maybe Anna Bell was trouble after all. I got into my silver sedan and locked the doors. I sat there in the parking lot, the rain drumming on the roof. I looked at the envelope in my lap. Meredith wanted me to break. She wanted me to run away. She wanted me to be the disaster she had always claimed I was. I tore open the envelope. I looked at the legal papers, the dense paragraphs of accusations and lies. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled note from my father. If she takes it to court, watch who walks in. I wiped a tear from my cheek. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to let her rewrite me again. I put the car in reverse. I had a meeting with Samuel Levi to schedule. If Meredith wanted a war, she was going to get one, but she wasn't fighting the old Anna anymore. She was fighting the Anna who had nothing left to lose. Samuel Levi's office smelled of stale coffee and old paper, the kind of scent that accumulates when you spend 30 years fighting losing battles for people who cannot afford to win. He sat behind his desk, a heavy oak monstrosity covered in files, and looked at me over the rim of his glasses. We need to be clear about something. Anna, he said. His voice was gravelly. worn down by decades of courtroom arguments. Meredith has retained the firm of Sterling, Hartz, and more. They bill at $800 an hour. They have a team of paralegals whose only job is to bury us in paper until we suffocate. I sat in the uncomfortable wooden chair opposite him, my hands folded tightly in my lap. I understand. I said, "No," Samuel said, leaning forward. "You do not understand. They are not just going to argue the law. They are going to argue you. They are going to take every mistake you have ever made, every bad day, every moment of weakness, and they are going to blow it up until it looks like a character flaw. And the most important thing, the absolute most important thing, is that you cannot react." He tapped a pen against the desk for emphasis. "Probate court is a theater of order." He continued, "It is designed to punish people who look emotional. If you cry, you look unstable. If you get angry, you look volatile. If you interrupt, you look disrespectful. Meredith's team knows this. They will bait you. They will say things that are untrue and hurtful, specifically to make you crack. If you crack, the judge will look at you and see exactly what Meredith wants him to see. A liability." I nodded slowly. "So I have to be a statue. You have to be a rock." Samuel corrected. "A boring, predictable rock. Now, let's look at the timeline." We spent the next 3 hours dissecting the last 5 years of my life. It was a humiliating archaeology. We had to prove a negative. Meredith was claiming I had used undue influence to manipulate our father into changing his will. To disprove that, I had to prove I had almost no relationship with him at all. I scrolled through my phone, reading the text messages aloud while Samuel took notes. January 4th, 2 years ago. I said, "He texted happy birthday." I replied, "Thanks, Dad." That was the entire conversation for the year. Samuel scribbled on his legal pad. "Good. Minimal contact. What else? September 10th, last year." I continued. I sent him an email about Mom's old jewelry box. I asked if I could have it. He never replied. I felt a hollow ache in my chest. At the time, that silence had hurt. Now, it was my shield. It was proof that I couldn't have whispered poison in his ear because I was never close enough to whisper anything. I was compiling a dossier of my own abandonment to save my future. We built a timeline of absence, month after month of silence, interrupted only by brief, awkward exchanges that went nowhere. It was the saddest document I had ever created, but Samuel looked at it with satisfaction. "This is good," he said. "It contradicts her narrative. A manipulator needs access. You didn't have any." Then he opened a folder that had been couriered over from Meredith's lawyers that morning. The mood in the room shifted instantly. Samuel's face hardened. "However," he said, sliding a document across the desk toward me, "we have a problem." I looked at the paper. It was a bank statement, or rather, a summary of transfers. Meredith's filing alleges that while you were physically distant, you were financially extracting. She claims you received secret cash gifts totaling $150,000 over the last 18 months. My jaw dropped. "That is a lie," I said. "I never took a dime from him. I pay my own rent. I drive a 10-year-old car. Look at my W-2s. Look at the document." "Anna," Samuel said softly. I looked closer. The paper detailed a series of wire transfers from the Bell Family Trust to an account labeled A. Bell, Personal. The dates corresponded to times when I was struggling when my car broke down. When I had that dental surgery, I put on a credit card. It looked real. There were transaction codes, bank routing numbers, and authorization stamps. If I didn't know my own life, I would have believed it. "How did they do this?" I whispered. "This isn't my account." Samuel took the paper back. "It's a sophisticated fabrication, or..." He paused, frowning. "Or it is a real account that someone opened in your name. Identity theft is easier than forgery. If your father or someone acting as your father opened an account, funneled money into it, and then drained it, it would look like you took it." "Meredith," I said, "she's framing me." "We have to prove it," Samuel said. "And to do that, we need the source documents. We need the trust's administrative logs. We need to see who authorized these transfers and where the money actually went after it hit this dummy account." He picked up the phone. I'm going to request the logs again. But Anna, be prepared. If they went to the trouble of creating this paper trail, they aren't going to hand over the map that proves it's fake. I left Samuel's office feeling like the sidewalk was tilting under my feet. The world felt dangerous in a new way. It wasn't just that Meredith hated me. It was that she had constructed a parallel reality where I was a villain, and she had the paperwork to prove it. I went home to my apartment. It felt small and fragile. I sat on my couch and stared at the box of my father's things again. I needed to feel close to the truth, and the only truth I had was in that cardboard box. I dug through it again, past the old watch and the tie clips. At the bottom, under a stack of unread spy novels, I found a small velvet pouch. I hadn't opened it before, assuming it was just cufflinks. I loosened the drawstring and tipped it out. It wasn't cufflinks. It was a key. It was a long, flat key, the kind used for safety deposit boxes. It was silver, tarnished with age, and stamped with a number 409. On the other side was the logo of First National, of Harrow Glen. My heart hammered against my ribs. The will had mentioned the Phoenix Archive, and a key. Was this it? Had Meredith missed this? I didn't wait. I grabbed my purse and the key and drove straight to the bank. First National was a cathedral of marble and silence. I walked to the front desk. Trying to keep my hands from shaking, I asked to speak to a vault manager. A woman in a navy suit came out. She had a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Can I help you?" I held up the key. "I believe my father, Robert Bell, left this for me. I need to access box 409. The woman's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She took the key and looked at it. "Please wait here a moment." She disappeared into a back office. I stood in the lobby, watching the security guard by the door. I felt exposed. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, the woman returned. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was accompanied by a man in a gray suit who looked like he handled bad news for a living. "Ms. Bell," the man said, "I am the branch manager. I'm afraid there has been a misunderstanding." "What misunderstanding?" I asked. "Box 409 is closed," he said. "Closed?" I stared at him. "Since when?" "Since last month," he said. "The contents were retrieved, and the lease was terminated." "That's impossible." I said, "My father died 3 weeks ago. He was in the hospital for the week before that. He couldn't have come here." The manager clasped his hands in front of him. "The records show that the box was accessed and closed by an authorized representative with power of attorney. Who I demanded. Who accessed it. I cannot disclose that information due to privacy regulations," he said smoothly, "but the box is empty. Ms. Bell, and this key?" He held it up, looking at it with disdain. "This key should have been destroyed." I reached out and snatched the key back from him. The metal was cold in my hand. "You're lying," I said. I didn't shout, but my voice trembled. "Someone took what was in there. If you have a dispute regarding the estate, I suggest you contact the executor," the manager said. "Please, have a good day." He turned his back on me. I walked out of the bank, the sunlight blinding me. I sat in my car and gripped the steering wheel. Last month, Meredith had power of attorney. She had cleaned it out. She had erased the Phoenix Archive before I even knew it existed. But why keep the key? Why leave it in his belongings? Unless she didn't know about this specific key, unless there were 2 keys, and she had used hers, never realizing my father had hidden a spare. She thought she had won, but she had left a trace. 2 days later, Samuel called me. He sounded frustrated. "They are stonewalling," he said. "I requested the administrative logs for the trust. The trustee's office, this independent firm, is claiming technical difficulties. They say the records are being migrated to a new secure server and won't be available for review for another 30 days. 30 days, I said. The hearing is in 10 days. Exactly. Samuel said, "They are running out the clock. They want to go before the judge with just their fabricated summary and no raw data to contradict it. I'm going to file a motion to compel, but judges are slow. We might walk into that courtroom blind. I hung up and put my head in my hands. The walls were closing in. That afternoon, the interoffice mail cart came by my desk at work. The mail clerk, a teenager named Kevin who always wore headphones, dropped a plain manila envelope on my desk. For you. Anna. He mumbled. There was no return address. Just my name, typed on a label. I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. It was a screenshot, a printout of a digital ledger. It showed the account Meredith had cited in her lawsuit, the one allegedly belonging to me. But this wasn't the polished bank statement Samuel had shown me. This looked like a back-end view, the kind of raw data a database administrator sees. There was my name, Anna Bell, and next to it, a transfer amount, $20,000, date March 3rd. But something was wrong. I cataloged invoices for a living. I spent my life looking at spreadsheets and fonts. I noticed patterns. The line with my name and the amount was in Arial font. Every other line on the page, the dates, the transaction codes, the headers was in Courier New. It was subtle, to a casual observer. It looked like a boring financial document, but to me, it screamed. The database didn't generate this. Someone had typed my name over an existing entry. They had photoshopped it, or edited the HTML before printing it, and they had been sloppy with the font match. I stared at the paper. Who sent this? It wasn't Meredith. She wouldn't send me proof of her own fraud. It wasn't Samuel. Someone inside the system was leaking. Someone knew what Meredith was doing, and they were trying to help me, or maybe they were just trying to cover their own back by leaving a trail. I scanned the image and emailed it to Samuel immediately. Subject: look at the fonts. Then I got up. I couldn't sit still anymore. I was done waiting for lawyers and judges. I needed to look her in the eye. Meredith lived in the Heights, a gated community where the lawns were manicured with scissors and the security guards knew the residents by name. I didn't have a pass, so I parked my car on the public street outside the gates and walked in through the pedestrian entrance. The guard tried to stop me, but I just kept walking. "I'm her sister," I yelled back without turning around. "Call the police if you want." He didn't call the police. He probably knew better than to cause a scene involving the Bells. I walked a mile up the winding hill to her house. It was a sprawling colonial mansion with white pillars and a driveway full of cars I couldn't afford. I rang the doorbell. Meredith opened it herself. She was wearing yoga pants and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my car. She held a glass of white wine. When she saw me, her face didn't register shock. It registered annoyance. "You're trespassing," she said. "I know," I said. I held up the printout of the screenshot, the one with the mismatched fonts. "I know what you're doing, Meredith. I know about the fake account. I know about the safe deposit box you emptied, and I know you're sloppy." Meredith looked at the paper, then at me. She took a sip of wine. She stepped aside and gestured for me to come in. "Come in, Anna, before the neighbors see you looking like a stray dog." I walked into the foyer. It was breathtakingly beautiful. Marble floors, a crystal chandelier, fresh flowers on a mahogany table. It was the life she had always wanted, the life she had always told me I wasn't good enough for. She closed the door and turned to me. "You think you have a smoking gun," she said, her voice calm. "You have a piece of paper. In court. It's hearsay. My experts will say it's a glitch, or they'll say you forged it yourself to discredit me." Why, I asked. The question came out like a plea. "Why are you doing this? You have everything. You have the house, the money, the status. Why do you need to destroy me to keep it?" Meredith laughed. It was a harsh, brittle sound. "You think this is about greed. You simple, stupid girl. This isn't about wanting more. It's about keeping what we have." She walked closer to me, her eyes hard. "You left, Anna. You walked away. You decided you were too good for this family, too moral for the business. You let Dad rot in this house while you played martyr in your little apartment. You don't deserve the inheritance. You forfeited your seat at the table when you decided you were better than us. It's not about being better." I said, "It was about surviving. Dad was toxic. You know that." "Dad was complicated," she snapped. "And I handled him. I managed the decline. I managed the outbursts. I managed the business when he was too drunk to sign checks. I earned this estate. I paid for it with 10 years of my life. And I am not going to let you swoop in at the finish line and take 40% just because you share a bloodline. She wasn't lying. She believed it. She had framed this theft as a moral crusade. In her mind, she wasn't stealing. She was balancing the scales. That's why you need the trust to stay closed. I said, realizing it as I spoke, "You've been paying yourself for years. You've been draining the accounts while he was alive, calling it management fees." Meredith's face went blank. The mask slammed back into place. "Get out of my house," she said quietly. "You're broke, aren't you?" I said. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The cars, the house, the clothes, it's all debt. You need the estate to cover the holes you've already dug. Meredith's hand shook. Just slightly. Wine sloshed against the side of the glass. "If you don't leave," she said, "I will call the sheriff. And this time, I will press charges." I looked at her. I didn't see the powerful matriarch anymore. I saw a terrified woman standing in a house made of cards. "I'm leaving." I said, "But Meredith, the fonts don't match, and the audit is coming." I turned and walked out. I didn't look back, but I could feel her watching me. I could feel the panic radiating off her like heat. I needed confirmation. I needed someone who knew the truth about the money. There was one person, Arthur Sterling. He wasn't related to us, but he had been my father's accountant for 20 years before he retired. He was a kind, quiet man who used to give me peppermint candies when I visited the office as a child. I found him at the jagged edge of the city, in a small bungalow where he lived with his cats. He looked older than I remembered, frail and gray. When I knocked, he opened the door on the chain. "Anna," he squinted. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "I need to ask you about the family accounts." He tried to close the door, but I put my hand on it. "Please, Meredith is suing me. She's saying I stole from Dad." "You know I didn't." He hesitated, then sighed and unhooked the chain. "Come in quickly." His living room was dark, the curtains drawn. He sat in a recliner and pointed me to a stool. "I can't help you." "Anna," he said, his voice trembling. "I signed a non-disclosure agreement when I retired. The penalty for breaking it is severe. Meredith is spending money that doesn't exist." I said, "I saw the fear in her eyes today. She's terrified of the audit. What did she do?" "Arthur." Arthur looked at his hands. He rubbed his knuckles. A nervous tick. "She has been borrowing against the family name for 5 years. He whispered. "Since the market turned, she leveraged the properties. She leveraged the future earnings. She took out private loans from non-traditional lenders." "What kind of lenders?" I asked. "The kind you don't miss payments to," he said darkly. "Your father found out 6 months ago. That's why he changed the will. That's why he created the trust with the audit trigger. He was trying to stop her. He was trying to save what was left before she lost it all." He looked up at me, his eyes watery. He was frightened. "Anna, near the end, Robert was terrified. Not of dying. He was afraid for you. He knew that if he died, Meredith would need a scapegoat. She needs the trust to remain opaque so she can keep moving money around to pay these men. If the audit happens, the shell game ends. And if the shell game ends..." He trailed off. "She's in danger." I said, "We are all in danger." Arthur said, "These people, they have a fixer, a consultant. I've never met him, but I've seen the emails. They call him when there is a compliance issue." He stood up, shaking. "You have to go. Anna, please, don't tell anyone I spoke to you. If they know I talked..." He ushered me out. I stood on his porch, the cold night air biting my skin. It wasn't just fraud. It was a desperate cover-up involving dangerous people. Meredith wasn't just a greedy sister. She was a hostage to her own mistakes. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a notification from my calendar app. New event added. I frowned. I hadn't added an event. I opened the app. A new entry had appeared for the following Tuesday at 9 in the morning. Subject hearing, Bell Estate versus Bell Location, Merrow County Probate Court. Room 304. He will arrive when the judge can't look away. I stared at the screen. The text in the location field wasn't a standard address. It was a message. He will arrive when the judge can't look away. The man in the black suit, the one my father warned me about, the one Arthur was terrified of, or someone else. I looked around the dark street. The streetlights hummed. A car drove by slowly, its headlights sweeping over me. I shrank back into the shadows. Someone had access to my calendar. Someone had access to the trust database. Someone was watching all of us, moving pieces on a board I could barely see. I wasn't fighting Meredith anymore. I was fighting the invisible architecture that held her up. I got into my car and locked the doors. I drove home, taking a different route than usual, checking my rearview mirror every 30 seconds. The hearing was in 4 days. Meredith had her high-priced lawyers. She had her forged documents. She had her desperate need to win. But I had a mismatched font. I had a closed bank box. And I had a warning. I gripped the wheel, let him arrive. I thought, let them all come. I was done being the victim in their story. If they wanted to burn it all down, I would be there to light the match. Merrow County Probate Court was designed to make you feel small. The ceilings were too high, the wood paneling was too dark, and the air was recycled so many times it tasted like dust and anxiety. Room 304 was packed. I sat at the plaintiff's table, though technically I was the respondent next to Samuel Levi. My hands were folded on the table, resting on a yellow legal pad. I was gripping the pen so hard my knuckles were white. But my face was a mask. Samuel had drilled this into me for 3 days. Be a rock. He had said, be boring. Across the aisle. Meredith sat like a queen in exile. She wore a navy suit that looked like armor, flanked by 3 attorneys from Sterling. Hartz and Moore, the lead attorney, a man named Marcus Hartz, who had a tan that looked painted on, was currently standing at the podium, explaining to Judge Calloway why I was unfit to inherit a single dollar of my father's estate. Your Honor, Hart said, his voice smooth and projecting to the back of the room. We are not here to disparage Ms. Bell. We are here to protect the legacy of Robert Bell from a pattern of instability that has been documented for years. The defense will argue that this is a simple will contest. We argue that it is a rescue mission. He turned and pointed a finger at me. It was theatrical, designed for a jury, even though this was a bench trial. Ms. Annabelle has a history of career volatility, estrangement, and public outbursts. To hand her a 40% controlling interest in the Bell Family Trust is not just irresponsible, it is contrary to the decedent's true intentions, which were manipulated in his final, vulnerable months. I stared straight ahead. I focused on the seal of the state hanging behind the judge's head. Do not react. Do not frown. Do not look at Meredith. Samuel stood up slowly. He looked disheveled compared to Hart's, but his voice was steady. Objection. Samuel said, Counsel is testifying. We are here to determine the validity of the will, not to conduct a performance review of my client's resume from 5 years ago. Judge Calloway looked over his glasses. He was a man with a face like a dried apple and eyes that had seen every version of human greed imaginable. Sustain the objection. Calloway grunted. Mr. Hartz, get to the evidence. I don't need the character study unless it connects to the undue influence claim. Call your witness. Hart smiled, unbothered. I call Annabelle to the stand. My stomach dropped. Samuel squeezed my arm under the table. Just the facts. He whispered, Don't defend yourself. Just answer. I walked to the witness stand. The wood floor creaked under my heels. I swore to tell the truth. Sat down and looked out at the room. Meredith was watching me. Her face was perfectly composed, but her eyes were alert, predatory. Hartz approached the stand. He didn't carry any notes. He wanted to make this look like a casual conversation. Ms. Bell, he began. You stated in your deposition that you loved your father. Is that correct? Yes. I said. And yet, you haven't visited his home in Harrow Glen for nearly 2 years prior to his death. Is that also correct? I lived in the same city. I said, but I did not visit the house. No. Why is that? Hartz asked. Because I wasn't welcome. I said, not welcome. Hartz raised an eyebrow. Did your father tell you that you weren't welcome? Not directly. I said, my sister, acting as his proxy, informed me that my presence was causing him distress and that I should keep my distance for his health. So you stayed away. Hart said, you didn't fight for him. You didn't drive over and knock on the door to check on this man you loved so much. I attempted to call. I said, keeping my voice level. The calls were screened. I attempted to email. The emails went unanswered. Hartz leaned against the railing. Or Ms. Bell, is it possible that you stayed away because you were angry that he had cut you off financially 4 years ago after the incident at the charity gala? I was not cut off. I said, I became financially independent. There is a difference. Hartz chuckled darkly. Independent. That is an interesting word. Let's talk about that independence. He walked back to his table and picked up a remote control. A large screen descended from the ceiling on the side of the courtroom. Exhibit C. Hart said. An image appeared on the screen. It was a series of text messages. The interface looked like an iPhone conversation. The contact name at the top was Dad. I squinted at the screen. The gray bubbles, the ones allegedly sent by me, read, I need $5,000 by Friday. Landlord is on my back again. Don't ignore me. You owe me this after what happened. Just transfer it to the account I sent. Meredith doesn't have to know. The blue bubbles, my father's responses were brief. I can't do this anymore. Anna, please stop asking. A murmur ran through the courtroom. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at Samuel. He was frowning, writing furiously. I looked back at the screen. The dates on the messages were from 6 months ago. Ms. Bell, Hart said, his voice hard now. Do you recognize these messages? No. I said, you don't. Hartz asked. They are from your phone number. We have the carrier logs to prove the number matches. I looked closer at the text. I need $5,000. I don't talk like that. I said, excuse me? Hart said, I don't use the word grand. I said, I never have. And I don't use that punctuation. I don't put spaces before my question marks. Look at the second message. There is a space before the question mark. Hart scoffed. So your defense is that the grammar is wrong. My defense is that I didn't write them. I said, my voice rising just a fraction. I never asked my father for money. Not once in 4 years. Hartz turned to the judge. Your Honor, these messages establish a pattern of harassment and financial coercion. They prove that the beneficiary was pressuring the decedent for cash, which aligns with the undue influence claim. She wore him down. Samuel stood up. Objection. Lack of authentication. Mr. Hartz is presenting screenshots. We have not seen the raw device data. We have not seen the metadata that proves these messages originated from my client's actual handset. Rather than being spoofed, anyone can spoof a phone number. Hartz sighed, looking bored. We have a digital forensic expert ready to testify to the integrity of the screenshots. Then bring him in. Samuel challenged, because my client denies sending these, and looking at the syntax, I am inclined to believe her. The judge tapped his gavel. Mr. Hartz, do you have the raw data? We have the extracts, Hartz said. The device itself, the decedent's phone, is currently in the possession of the trustee for safekeeping. So you are presenting evidence you haven't physically verified, Judge Calloway asked. He looked irritated. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. We are relying on the trustee's certified copies, Hart said. That's convenient. Samuel muttered loud enough for the mic to catch it. Judge Calloway looked at the clock. It is 11:30. We are going to take a recess. Mr. Hartz, when we return, I want better chain of custody on these texts than the trustee sent them. Court is in recess for 1 hour. The bailiff called, All rise. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly. I needed air. The courtroom felt like a coffin. Samuel grabbed my elbow as we walked out. You did good, he said low. You stayed calm. They're fake. Samuel, I whispered, I swear to you. I know, he said. The syntax argument was smart, but we need to prove it technically. I'm going to call our tech guy. Go get some water. Don't talk to anyone. I walked down the long marble corridor of the courthouse. It was crowded with lawyers and clients, a sea of suits and desperation. I found a vending machine in a quiet alcove near the fire exit and bought a bottle of water. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the change. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes. $5,000. Who talks like that? Meredith talks like that. Meredith deals in grand. I deal in dollars and cents. I opened my eyes and looked down the hallway toward the private conference rooms. The door to one of the rooms was slightly ajar. I saw a flash of blonde hair. Meredith. I shouldn't have looked. I should have walked away. But I stepped closer, drawn by a morbid gravity. Meredith was standing just inside the room. She wasn't alone. She was talking to a man I had never seen before. He was tall, maybe 6'3", wearing a black suit that fit him so perfectly it looked like a second skin. He didn't look like a lawyer. Lawyers have a certain frantic energy, a hunger. This man was completely still. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking down at Meredith. Meredith, the woman who terrified me, the woman who commanded boardrooms, looked small. She was wringing her hands. He's asking for the source files. Meredith hissed. Her voice carried into the hallway. The judge isn't just stamping it. He wants the phone. Then give him the phone, the man said. His voice was a deep, flat baritone. It had no inflection. I can't, Meredith said. We wiped it. You told me to wipe it before the clone was made. If I give them the physical phone, they'll see it's empty. They'll know the screenshots were generated externally. The man didn't blink. He didn't look angry. He just looked at her with a terrifying neutrality. That was a misstep, he said. You said you would handle the back end. Meredith's voice rose, cracking with panic. You said the trustee would validate whatever we gave them. The trustee is doing his job, the man said. You need to do yours. If the judge demands the phone, you lose the phone. You lost it. It was misplaced during the funeral arrangements. I can't just lose evidence, Meredith said. You can, the man said. Or you can explain why the timestamps on the messages don't match the carrier data. Which would you prefer? Meredith went silent. She looked physically ill. The man reached out and adjusted the lapel of her blazer. It was a gentle gesture, but Meredith flinched as if he had struck her. Fix your face. Meredith, he said. You look guilty. And remember, the loan is callable on the outcome of this hearing. We are not extending the terms again. He turned toward the door. I gasped and pulled back, pressing myself flat against the wall behind a vending machine. I held my breath. The door opened. The man in the black suit walked out. He moved with a silent, fluid grace. He didn't look left or right. He walked straight toward the elevators. I waited until the elevator dinged and the doors closed before I exhaled. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The loan is callable. Arthur Sterling was right. She wasn't just in debt. She was owned. And this man, this risk management figure, was the one holding the leash. I realized then that Meredith wasn't the villain of this story. She was just the front man. When court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted. The air was heavier. Judge Calloway sat high on his bench, looking down at the defense table. Mr. Hartz, Calloway said, regarding the text messages. Mr. Hart stood up. He looked slightly less confident than before. Your Honor, we have been informed that the physical device, the decedent's phone, cannot be located at this time. It appears to have been misplaced during the transition of assets. Samuel didn't even have to stand up. He just let out a loud, incredulous sigh. Misplaced, Judge Calloway said. His voice was dangerously soft. You are telling me that the primary piece of evidence for your claim of undue influence is missing, and all we have are screenshots provided by the plaintiff. It is a temporary issue. Your Honor, Hart said, we are tracking it down. Calloway leaned forward. I want the trustee here, now. Who is the court-appointed fiduciary for the Bell Family Trust? A firm called Apex Fiduciary Services. Hart said, the specific agent is Mr. Silas Vance. Vance, the nervous man I had met in the diner, the one who told me about the anomalies. Get Mr. Vance in this courtroom, Calloway ordered. Hartz cleared his throat. We attempted to contact Mr. Vance during the recess. We were informed by his office that he has suffered a sudden medical emergency. He is currently unavailable. I looked at Samuel. He raised his eyebrows. Medical emergency? It was the oldest trick in the book. Judge Calloway slammed his hand down on the bench. It wasn't the gavel. It was his open palm. The sound cracked like a gunshot. Medical emergency, he repeated. First the phone is lost. Now the trustee is sick. Mr. Hartz, I am beginning to feel that this court is being played with. No, Your Honor. Hart said, I am setting a deadline. Calloway said, I want a representative from Apex Fiduciary in this courtroom tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. If Mr. Vance is dying, send his boss. If his boss is sick, send the janitor who has the keys to the server room. But if I do not have independent verification of these trust logs by tomorrow morning, I am going to sanction your client for wasting the court's time. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Hart said, and Ms. Bell, Calloway said, looking at Meredith, you are the temporary executor. If that phone is not found, I will instruct the court to draw a negative inference regarding its contents. That means I will assume the phone contains evidence that hurts your case. Find it, Meredith nodded. Staring at the table, she looked pale. Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. Calloway said, I didn't go home. I couldn't. The image of the man in the black suit was burned into my retinas. He will arrive when the judge can't look away. That was the note in the calendar. But he hadn't come into the courtroom yet. He was still in the shadows. I needed something real. I needed the gun my father had promised. I drove to Harrow Glen. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawns of the wealthy. I pulled up to my father's house. It was dark. The utilities were still on, but no one was living there. Meredith had staged it for sale. But it sat empty, a monument to a life that had ended in fear. I had a key. I had kept it on my ring for 4 years, a tiny act of rebellion I never used, until now. I unlocked the front door and stepped in. The air smelled of lemon polish and stale scotch. It was the smell of my childhood. I didn't turn on the main lights. I used the flashlight on my phone. The beam cutting through the gloom, I walked past the living room, past the dining table where we used to have silent, tense dinners. I went straight to his study. It was a wood-paneled room at the back of the house. Meredith had clearly been through it. The desk was clear. The bookshelves were tidy. Anything obviously valuable or incriminating had been removed. But Meredith looked at things from the top down. She looked for files labeled tax returns or bank statements. She didn't know how our father's mind worked when he was cornered. When I was 10, I used to play hide-and-seek in this room. I knew that the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet didn't just hold files. It had a false back. He used to hide his good cigars there so Mom wouldn't find them. I knelt in front of the cabinet. I pulled out the bottom drawer. It was full of old insurance policies, car insurance from 1998, flood insurance for a property he sold 10 years ago, boring paper, the kind of paper you skip over. I reached behind the hanging folders. My fingers brushed against the metal back of the drawer. I felt for the latch. Click! The false panel popped forward. My heart raced. I reached into the dark cavity and pulled out a thin manila folder. It wasn't thick. It didn't look like a smoking gun. It looked like trash. The label on the tab was handwritten in pencil contingency. I sat back on my heels and opened it. Inside were 3 sheets of paper. The first was a draft of a trust amendment. It was dated 6 months ago. It was filled with legal jargon, but one paragraph was circled in red ink. Authority to remove the family trustee shall be absolute upon proof of unauthorized leveraging of assets. The second page was a printout of an email. It was from my father to a generic email address, consulting apex-fid.com, ... Subject, stop the withdrawals, ... body. I know what you are doing with Meredith ... This has to stop. I will not sign the new collateral agreement. If you threaten her again, I will go to the authorities. My breath caught in my throat. He knew. He had tried to stop it. I turned to the third page. It was a piece of notebook paper. My father's handwriting again. Anna, if you found this, I failed. They have a system. It's not just Meredith. It's the administration itself. The ledger has a ghost layer. You have to look for the sentence ended there. The bottom half of the page was gone. It had been torn off. The tear was clean, sharp, as if done with a ruler. I stared at the jagged edge of the paper. Look for what I flipped the folder over. Nothing else. Someone had been here before me. Someone had found the contingency file, read it, and removed the key piece of information, the instruction on how to find the ghost layer. But why leave the rest? Why leave the email implicating the consultant? Because they wanted me to know. It was a taunt, or maybe a warning. I shoved the folder into my bag. I stood up, sweeping the flashlight beam around the room. I felt a sudden, primal certainty that I was not alone. I spun around. The hallway was empty. The house creaked. Settling into the night, I ran. I didn't care about dignity. I ran out of the study, down the hall, and out the front door. I locked it with shaking hands and sprinted to my car. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. The house stood dark and silent, but in the upstairs window, my father's bedroom, I thought I saw a curtain move. The next morning, the Merrill County Probate Court felt like a bomb waiting to go off. I had slept 2 hours. The folder was in my bag, resting against my leg under the table. I had shown it to Samuel at 8 o'clock at Glum. He had turned pale and said, "We hold this. We wait for the right moment." The courtroom was full. The press had arrived. The blog post about the wealthy sister versus troubled sister had gained traction, and now there were reporters in the back row. Judge Calloway entered. He looked tired. "All rise." We sat. Judge Calloway looked at the defense table. "Mr. Hartz, where is the representative from Apex Fiduciary?" Hartz stood up. He looked exhausted. He had dark circles under his eyes. "Your Honor," he began, "Mr. Vance is still hospitalized. However, we have been contacted by a senior oversight officer from the firm who has agreed to appear voluntarily to clarify the record." Calloway narrowed his eyes. "Is he here?" "Yes, Your Honor." The double doors at the back of the courtroom opened. The room went quiet. A man walked in. He was tall. He was wearing a black suit. My blood ran cold. It was him, the man from the hallway, the man who had told Meredith to fix her face. He walked down the center aisle with a calm, terrifying confidence. He carried a leather briefcase. He didn't look at the press. He didn't look at me. He walked past the bar and stopped behind the defense table. He placed a hand on the back of Meredith's chair. Meredith went rigid. She stared straight ahead, her eyes wide and glassy. "He isn't a lawyer." I whispered to Samuel. Samuel was staring at him. "That's not a lawyer." Samuel agreed. "That's a cleaner." The man looked up at the bench. He locked eyes with Judge Calloway. For a second, the judge froze. It wasn't confusion, it was recognition. Judge Calloway's hand hovered over his gavel. And for the first time since this trial started, the judge looked uncertain. The man in the black suit gave a microscopic nod. Then he sat down behind Meredith, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a single, sealed red file. He will arrive when the judge can't look away. The prophecy was real, and looking at the judge's face, I realized that whatever was in that red file was going to change everything. The morning light filtering through the high windows of room 304 was gray and unforgiving. It did not look like a day for justice. It looked like a day for bad news. Judge Calloway entered the courtroom precisely at 9 o'clock. Usually, he walked with a heavy, purposeful stride. The gait of a man who had heard every lie Merrill County had to offer and remained unimpressed. Today, he moved slowly. He arranged his robes. He adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the gallery, which was packed with reporters, curious locals, and the few friends Meredith had summoned to witness her victory. Then he looked at the defense table. He didn't look at Meredith. He didn't look at Marcus Hartz, her overpriced attorney. He looked directly at the man in the black suit sitting behind them. "All rise," the bailiff called out, his voice cracking slightly. We stood. The rustle of fabric was the only sound in the room. "Be seated," Calloway said. He folded his hands on the bench. He did not pick up the docket. "Before we proceed with the scheduled testimony regarding the text message authentication," Calloway said, his voice tight and unusually formal, "the court acknowledges the presence of an observer from the State Fiduciary Oversight Board." A murmur went through the room. Samuel Levi, sitting next to me, stiffened. He leaned in close to my ear. "That is not good," Samuel whispered. "That is really not good." For who, I whispered back. "For everyone." Samuel said. The man in the black suit stood up. He moved with that same terrifying economy of motion I had seen in the hallway. He buttoned his jacket once. "Thank you, Your Honor," the man said. His voice was not loud, but it carried to the back of the room without a microphone. "For the record, I am Julian Kincaid, Senior Compliance Officer for the Fiduciary Risk Division. I am here pursuant to a Stage 4 audit trigger attached to the estate of Robert Bell." The room went deadly silent. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a second. Judge Calloway froze. It was a subtle reaction, a tightening of the jaw, a slight widening of the eyes. I saw it because I had spent my whole life watching powerful men for signs of danger. The judge knew what a Stage 4 audit was, and he was afraid of it. "Mr. Kincaid," Calloway said, "I was under the impression that the audit was a contingency dependent on the outcome of this probate hearing." "That is incorrect," Kincaid said calmly. He walked to the center of the aisle. "The audit was triggered the moment the filing to contest the will was logged by the clerk of this court. The investigation has been active for 72 hours. Meredith's lawyer, Marcus Hartz, jumped to his feet. "Objection," Hartz shouted. "This is highly irregular. We have received no notice of an active audit. My client has rights to privacy regarding sit down." "Mr. Hartz," the judge snapped. He didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Kincaid. "Mr. Kincaid," Calloway said, "you are presenting findings. I am presenting a suspension of probate." Kincaid said, "And I am presenting evidence of criminal malfeasance that requires immediate preservation." The word criminal hung in the air like smoke. Judge Calloway nodded slowly. "Bailiff," Calloway said, "clear the courtroom." What Hartz sputtered. "Your Honor, this is a public proceeding. I am converting this into a sealed evidentiary hearing in camera." Calloway said, "Members of the press, members of the public, you are ordered to vacate these premises immediately. Bailiff, secure the doors. No one leaves the counsel tables." Chaos erupted. The reporters scrambled. Sensing the real story was happening behind the doors they were being pushed out of. The spectators grumbled. But within 5 minutes, the room was empty. It was just us, me, Samuel, Meredith, Hartz, the judge, and the man in black. The silence that followed was heavy, pressurized. It felt like being underwater. Kincaid walked to the bench. He placed a thick, sealed red packet on the judge's desk. Then he turned and placed a duplicate packet on our table, and one on Meredith's table. "Open them," Kincaid said. I looked at Samuel. He nodded. I broke the seal on the red envelope. Inside were logs, hundreds of lines of data. "This is the administrative access log for the Bell Family Trust," Kincaid said. He stood in the center of the room, addressing the judge, but feeling like he was addressing a firing squad. 3 weeks ago," Kincaid continued, "an attempt was made to access the trust's core ledger. The user utilized a trustee credential assigned to Apex Fiduciary Services. Specifically, the credentials of Mr. Silas Vance." I looked at the page. I saw the timestamps. "However," Kincaid said, "at the time of this access, Mr. Vance was physically located in a hospital recovery room, under sedation following emergency surgery. He was not logging in." "Then who was Judge Calloway?" asked. Kincaid turned and looked at Meredith. He didn't glare. He just looked at her as if she were a column of numbers that didn't add up. "We traced the IP address," Kincaid said. "The access originated from a residential secure line registered to the Bell estate. Specifically, The guest house. Meredith went pale. Her hands were gripping the table so hard her fingernails were colorless. That proves nothing, Hart said. Though his voice lacked its usual boom, family members often have access to shared computers. Kincaid ignored him. He pointed to the second tab in the packet. During this unauthorized session, Kincaid said, 3 specific alterations were made to the historical record. First, a series of withdrawals totaling $200,000 over 4 years were recoded. They were originally listed as personal draw, Meredith Bell. They were changed to read, consulting fees, external, I gasped. She was erasing her debt. She was hiding the money she had taken. Second, Kincaid said, a new sub-account was created, labeled A. Bell, personal. The fake account, I whispered. And third, Kincaid said, a data packet was uploaded to the cloud storage associated with the deceased's mobile device backup. He paused, letting the weight of the technical jargon settle. Mr. Hartz, Kincaid said, you told this court that the text messages presented as evidence were extracted from the decedent's phone. That is what I was told, Hart said, looking at Meredith with sudden suspicion. They were not. Kincaid said, the forensic analysis shows that the text messages, the ones where Anna Bell allegedly demands money, were created in a text editor and uploaded to the backup server during this unauthorized session. They were never sent. They were never received. They were planted. I felt a sob rise in my throat, but I choked it down. They were planted. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't forgetful. I was being framed by a machine. Judge Calloway looked at the documents. He flipped through the pages, his face darkening with every line. Ms. Bell, Calloway said to Meredith, did you access the trust database? Meredith didn't answer. She was staring at Kincaid. I asked you a question, Ms. Bell. Calloway said, I don't know what he's talking about, Meredith whispered. Her voice was thin, reedy. I'm not a computer person. I don't know how to code. You don't need to know how to code, Kincaid said. You just need the password, and you had help. He turned back to the judge. Your Honor, the most significant document in this packet is not the log. It is the intake form. Tab 4, Kincaid said. I turned to tab 4. It was a photocopy of a handwritten letter. It was dated 1 month before my father died. It was addressed to the Fiduciary Oversight Board. To the director, I, Robert Bell, being of sound mind, request a Stage 4 audit of my estate immediately upon my death if any legal challenge is filed against the distribution of assets. I believe there is internal fraud occurring within the administration of my trust. I believe my daughter, Meredith, is being coerced or is a willing participant in a scheme to leverage the estate's assets for high-risk debt repayment. If she sues her sister, it means the scheme is active. Trigger the trap. Signed, Robert Bell. I stared at the signature, the shaky, familiar scrawl of my father. He knew. He didn't just suspect. He knew exactly what Meredith was doing, and he knew she would come for me. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. He hadn't left the money in a trust to control me. He had done it to force Meredith into the open. He knew she couldn't help herself. He knew she would try to break the will, and by doing so, she would pull the pin on the grenade he had buried in the garden. I looked up at Meredith. She was reading the letter. Her mouth was open slightly. She looked like a child who had been slapped. He turned me in. She whispered. Her voice was full of genuine shock. Dad turned me in. He protected the asset. Kincaid corrected her cold. Corporate logic. Meredith stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. He didn't protect anything she screamed. The sound was shocking in the sealed room. He sat in his chair and drank scotch while I fixed everything. Ms. Bell, sit down, the judge warned. I will not sit down, Meredith shouted. She turned to me, her eyes wild. You think he loved you? You think this is some noble gesture? He was a coward. Anna. He knew the business was underwater 5 years ago. He knew it, and he let me take the helm. He let me sign the papers. He let me talk to the investors. What investors, I asked. My voice was calm, steady, the voice of the rock Samuel told me to be. The people who matter. Meredith cried. She was pacing now. Her perfect composure shattered into sharp, jagged shards. We needed liquidity. The banks wouldn't touch us after the scandal. So I went outside. I found capital. You went to loan sharks, Samuel said. I went to private equity, Meredith insisted. But the terms were aggressive. I had to make payments. I had to show growth. I had to borrow against the real estate to pay the interest on the operating loans. It was a circle. It was a carousel. And I couldn't get off. She pointed a shaking finger at the red file. I didn't steal the money for me. I didn't buy jewelry. I bought time. I paid the mortgage on the house you grew up in. I paid the retainer for the lawyers who kept Dad out of prison for tax evasion 3 years ago. Did you know about that? No, because you were living your simple little life in an apartment while I was cleaning up the blood. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. I had to cut you out, Meredith said, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. I needed your 40%. It was the only way to clear the principal. If I could get the whole estate, I could pay them off. I could be free. Who is them? Meredith Kincaid asked. Meredith stopped. She looked at Kincaid, and for the first time, I saw genuine terror in her eyes. Not legal terror, physical terror. I can't, she said. Who helped you alter the records? Kincaid asked. You said you aren't a computer person. Who logged in? Who created the fake texts? Meredith clamped her mouth shut. She sat back down, collapsing into her chair as if her strings had been cut. Judge Calloway looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Kincaid. Mr. Kincaid, do you have a name? We have a suspect, Kincaid said. The forensic trail points to a third-party administrator embedded within the trust's operational team, a financial consultant who has been billing the estate for strategic advisory services for 5 years. Name, the judge repeated. Kincaid opened the last page of his file. Mr. Elias Thorne, Kincaid said. I frowned. The name meant nothing to me. But I saw Samuel write it down and circle it twice. Is Mr. Thorne present? The judge asked. No, Kincaid said. Mr. Thorne's employment was terminated by Apex Fiduciary this morning, effective immediately. His whereabouts are currently unknown, but we have secured his laptop. Judge Calloway sat back. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked like a man who had woken up thinking he was refereeing a tennis match and found himself in the middle of a war zone. This court is no longer hearing a will contest, Calloway said quietly. We are hearing a confession to fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. He looked at Marcus Hartz. Mr. Hartz, I suggest you advise your client that anything she says from this point forward can and will be used against her in a criminal court. If I were you, I would stop talking about undue influence and start talking about a plea deal. Hartz looked sick. I would like to request a recess. Your Honor, to confer with my client. Request denied. Calloway said, We are not done. The judge turned to me. Ms. Bell, he said. I sat up straighter. Yes, Your Honor, the court owes you an apology, Calloway said. It appears the system was weaponized against you. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I felt a profound, aching sadness. I looked at Meredith. She was staring at the table, tears finally leaking out of her eyes. She wasn't the monster I had feared. She was just a desperate, broken woman who had tried to build a castle out of debt and lies, and who had been willing to bury her sister to keep the walls from falling. And my father? He had watched it all happen. He had written that letter, sealed it, and died, knowing that he was setting us against each other. Was it love to give me the weapon to destroy her, or was it cowardice to wait until he was gone so he wouldn't have to watch the explosion? I think it was both. Your Honor, Kincaid said, the Oversight Board requests an immediate order for the preservation of all estate assets. We also request that the control of the Bell Family Trust be immediately transferred to a court-appointed receiver. Granted, Calloway said. Meredith Bell is hereby removed as executor and trustee, effective immediately. Her access to all accounts is revoked. Her passport is to be surrendered to the court clerk by noon today. Meredith let out a small, strangled sound. And, Calloway added, looking at the man in black, Mr. Kincaid, you mentioned a third party. Mr. Thorne? Yes, Kincaid said. If this fraud extends to the fiduciary level, Calloway said, then this is not just a family matter. It is a state matter. I want the full audit report on my desk in 48 hours. It will be there, Kincaid said. The judge banged his gavel. This hearing is adjourned. The record is sealed until further notice. The bailiff moved to unlock the doors. I stood up. My legs felt heavy. Samuel began packing his briefcase, his hands moving quickly. We need to go, Samuel said low. The press is going to be swarming when they realize Meredith isn't coming out smiling. I stepped out from behind the table. Meredith was still sitting there. Hartz was whispering furiously to her, but she wasn't listening. She looked up and met my eyes. For a moment, the years of anger, the insults, the perfect outfits, and the cruel words fell away. I just saw my big sister. You should have run, Anna, she said softly. You don't know what you've unlocked. It's over. Meredith, I said. No, she said. She shook her head. A strange, disjointed movement. It's not over, Elias. He doesn't like loose ends. Who is Elias? I asked, but she looked away. She wouldn't speak to me again. I turned to leave. The man in the black suit, Kincaid, was standing by the exit. He was waiting for me. Ms. Bell, he said. I stopped. Mr. Kincaid. He looked at me with those cool, assessing eyes. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a mechanic who had just fixed an engine and was checking for leaks. Your father was a smart man, Kincaid said. But he was playing a dangerous game. What do you mean? I asked. He knew that if he reported the fraud while he was alive, Meredith would have been arrested, and the scandal would have destroyed the company's value. He would have died a pauper. So he waited. I said bitterly, he waited. Kincaid agreed. He let her dig the hole deeper, knowing that eventually she would try to push you in, and he counted on you being strong enough to climb out. He handed me a card. It was plain white with a phone number. No name. Mr. Thorne is not just a consultant, Kincaid said. He is an architect of difficult situations. We have been tracking his work for a long time. Meredith was just one of his clients. Now that she has collapsed, he will be looking to close his exposure. Is that a warning? I asked. It is a statement of fact. Kincaid said, Be careful. Ms. Bell, you have the inheritance now, but you also have the attention of the people who wanted it. He opened the door for me. I walked out into the hallway. The flashbulbs erupted. The reporters shouted my name. Ms. Bell, Ms. Bell. Is it true your sister has been removed? Anna, look this way. I didn't look at them. I looked straight ahead. Clutching the strap of my bag, I had won. I had 40% of the estate. I had my reputation back. But as I walked through the crowd, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't won a prize. I had inherited a target. I looked back one last time toward the courtroom. The doors were closing. Through the gap, I saw Meredith standing up, looking small and defeated, and behind her, the man in the black suit was watching her, not like a lawyer, but like a predator deciding if the wounded animal was worth finishing off. Then the doors clicked shut. The nature of the war had changed. For the first 3 weeks, I thought I was fighting a battle of sibling rivalry. I thought I was up against Meredith's jealousy, her need for control, and her lifelong campaign to paint me as the unstable disappointment of the Bell family. I thought it was personal. I was wrong. As the sealed evidentiary hearings dragged into their third day, the scope of the rot became visible. It wasn't just a sister hating a sister. It was an ecosystem. We weren't looking at a family dispute anymore. We were dissecting a corrupted financial organism that had been feeding on the Bell estate for years. There was the trustee who looked the other way, the embedded consultant who designed the trap, and the pipeline of fabricated evidence that had been built to crush me. Meredith was just the face of the operation. She was the desperate captain of a sinking ship, but she hadn't built the ship, and she certainly hadn't drilled the holes in the hull. The courtroom felt smaller now, The gallery was still empty, sealed by Judge Calloway's order, which made the tension concentrated and suffocating. The air conditioner hummed, a low, monotonous drone that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. Samuel Levi sat beside me, sifting through a stack of documents that Julian Kincaid, the man in the black suit, had provided. Samuel looked energized. He was no longer the disheveled attorney fighting a losing battle. He was a shark who had smelled blood in the water. "Look at this," Samuel whispered, sliding a sheet of paper toward me. "This is the billing structure for Mr. Thorne's consulting firm." I looked at the invoice. "Strategic advisory services, $25,000 per month. And look at the addendum," Samuel said. "Performance bonuses tied to liquidity events." I stared at the numbers. A liquidity event meant selling something, or someone dying. They were betting on the estate. I said, "They were strip mining it," Samuel corrected, and Meredith was signing the checks. During the morning recess, Marcus Hartz approached our table. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 48 hours. His tan seemed to have grayed, and his tie was slightly askew. "Mr. Levi, Miss Bell," Hart said. His voice was hushed. "Can we speak in the conference room, privately?" Samuel looked at me. I nodded. We went to the small, windowless room off the main hallway. Hartz closed the door and didn't sit down. He stood at the end of the table, gripping the back of a chair. "My client is prepared to offer a settlement," Hart said. Samuel laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. "A settlement, Mr. Hartz. Your client is currently facing allegations of fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. The time for a settlement was 2 weeks ago. Please, hear me out," Hart said. He sounded desperate. "Meredith understands that her position is compromised. She is willing to sign over a lump sum of $500,000 to Anna, immediately, tax-free, paid from her personal holdings, not the estate." I looked at him. $500,000. A month ago. That amount of money would have changed my life. It would have bought me a house, a new car, a future where I didn't have to catalog invoices for the city parks department. And in exchange, Samuel asked. "In exchange," Hart said, "Anna agrees to drop the contest to the will. She agrees to a binding confidentiality clause regarding the administrative irregularities discovered during this hearing, and she agrees to a joint statement that the dispute was a misunderstanding regarding family communication." I sat very still. They wanted to buy my silence. They wanted to pay me $500,000 to bury the truth about the fake text messages, the altered logs, and the man named Elias Thorne. If I took it, I could walk away. I could be safe. I could disappear into a comfortable life and never see Meredith or a courtroom again. But then I thought about the text messages. I need $5,000. I thought about the way Meredith had looked at me at the funeral, telling me not to embarrass the family. I thought about the last 4 years of my life, living in the shadow of a story they had written for me, Anna the failure, Anna the problem. If I signed that paper, I was agreeing to let that story stand. I was agreeing that I was the problem, and they had paid me to go away. "Ms. Bellhartz asked. "It is a generous offer. It stops the bleeding." I stood up. My legs were steady. "No," I said. Hartz blinked. "Excuse me, no." I repeated, "I don't want the money." "Anna, think about this," Hart said. "The litigation could drag on for years. The estate could be tied up in receivership. You might end up with nothing." "I don't care," I said, and I meant it. I realized in that moment that I wasn't fighting for the inheritance anymore. I was fighting for the record. I wanted it written down, stamped by a judge, and filed in the archives of Merrow County that I was not crazy. I wanted the world to know that I didn't steal, I didn't beg, and I didn't manipulate my father. "Silence is how you did this to me," I said. Looking Hartz in the eye, "You used silence to rewrite my life. You counted on me being too ashamed to speak up. I am not ashamed anymore. We are not accepting the offer," Samuel said, closing his briefcase. "We are going back into court, and we are going to subpoena Elias Thorne." Elias Thorne arrived after lunch. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like the kind of man who is featured in business magazines under headlines like The New Visionaries. He was in his early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and a suit that fit him better than Meredith's fitted her. He walked into the courtroom with a relaxed, easy stride, carrying nothing but a slim tablet. He took the oath as if he were agreeing to a dinner reservation. "Mr. Thorne," Samuel began. "Standing at the podium, you were employed by the Bell Family Trust as a strategic consultant. Is that correct?" "I was an independent contractor," Thorne said. His voice was smooth, a rich baritone that sounded trustworthy. "I provided advisory services on asset allocation and risk mitigation." "Risk mitigation," Samuel repeated. "Is creating false bank accounts a form of risk mitigation?" Thorne smiled slightly. It was a patronizing smile. "I think you are mischaracterizing the strategy. Mr. Levi, high net worth estates often use sub-accounts for tax efficiency. We have evidence," Samuel said, holding up the red file, "that you personally oversaw the creation of a digital trail designed to implicate Anna Bell in financial impropriety. We have emails where you instructed the IT administrator to make the timeline fit the narrative." Thorne didn't flinch. "I advised Ms. Meredith Bell on how to document her concerns." Thorne said, "Meredith came to me. She was terrified that her sister, who had a history of volatility, would dissipate the family assets. She asked me how to protect the estate. I gave her options." "Options?" Samuel asked. "You scripted a frame job. I provided a framework for containment." Thorne said coolly. "Meredith was the decision-maker. She had the power of attorney. She had the trustee credentials. I was merely a consultant. I advise. I do not execute. I watched him from the table. He was doing exactly what Kincaid had warned me about. He was cutting his losses. He was throwing Meredith to the wolves to save himself." Samuel pressed him. "Did you draft the text messages that were uploaded to the decedent's phone?" "I drafted potential communication scenarios based on Meredith's descriptions of her sister's behavior." Thorne said, "If Meredith chose to present those scenarios as fact, that was her choice. You are under oath." "Mr. Thorne," Samuel shouted. "And I am telling you the truth," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a calm, reasonable register. "I am a strategist. I deal in hypotheticals. I cannot control how my clients use my work product." He was slippery. He was made of Teflon. I looked at Meredith. She was staring at Thorne with a look of pure betrayal. She had trusted him. She had probably thought he was her partner, her savior. And now he was sitting there, calm and collected, calling her the architect of her own destruction. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. I stood up. Samuel looked at me, surprised. "Anna, I want to ask a question." "Your Honor," I said. Judge Calloway looked at me. "This is unusual. Ms. Bell, I am representing myself as the primary victim of this fraud." I said, "I know the timeline better than anyone." Calloway nodded. "Proceed." I walked to the podium. I didn't look at Samuel. I looked at Elias Thorne. "Mr. Thorne," I said. My voice didn't shake. I didn't feel the need to shout. I felt precise. "You said you only advise." I said, "Correct." Thorne said, "On October 14th of last year." I said, citing the date from memory. "My father attempted to fire you. He sent an email to Apex Fiduciary. 2 days later, a withdrawal of $40,000 was made from his personal operating account, labeled severance. Who authorized that?" "Meredith Bell authorized all transactions." Thorne said, "No." I said, "Meredith was in Paris that week. I have her credit card statements. She was at a Fashion Week event. She didn't have access to the secure token required for a wire transfer of that size." Thorne paused. His eyes narrowed just a fraction. "The token," I continued, "was physically located in the safe in my father's study. The logs show the transfer was initiated from a remote terminal. Specifically, a terminal with the MAC address ending in 442. I turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the discovery packet provided by Mr. Kincaid includes a list of devices registered to Mr. Thorne's consulting firm. His laptop has a MAC address ending in 442. The room went silent. Thorne shifted in his seat. The relaxed posture evaporated. I said, Meredith authorized it, Thorne said, his voice harder. She gave me the verbal instruction. So you did execute, I said. You just admitted you performed the transfer. You claimed 5 minutes ago you never executed transactions. Which is it, Mr. Thorne? Are you a consultant, or are you a thief? Thorne stared at me. The charm was gone. I saw the reptile underneath. I was acting as an agent of the trustee. He snapped, You were stealing. I said, And you were doing it because my father found out you were leveraging the estate's assets to cover your own failed investments in a shell company called North Lake Holdings. Thorne froze. How do you know about North Lake, he whispered. Because I stopped crying and started reading. I said, I turned back to the table and sat down. Samuel looked at me with wide eyes. That was effective, he whispered. I didn't smile. I didn't feel happy. I just felt clean. I had stopped trying to be the emotional sister. I had become the facts. Credibility wasn't about charisma. It was about consistency. And for the first time in my life, I was the most consistent thing in the room. The unraveling of Meredith's life happened in the afternoon session. Julian Kincaid took the stand. He didn't need to be cross-examined. He simply presented the audit findings, layer by layer, like a coroner conducting an autopsy. The court has traced the debt structures, Kincaid said. His voice was devoid of emotion. Ms. Bell did not merely borrow money. She securitized her social standing. He projected a spreadsheet onto the wall. These are promissory notes. Kincaid explained. Meredith Bell borrowed sums ranging from $50,000 to $200,000 from individuals within her social circle. The collateral listed was not property. It was guaranteed access to future investment opportunities within the Bell Family Trust. I listened, horrified. She had sold tickets to a show that didn't exist. She promised returns of 15%, Kincaid said, to pay the returns to the early investors. She borrowed from new investors. It's a Ponzi scheme, the judge said, rubbing his temples. A micro-Ponzi. Kincaid agreed. Sustained by the reputation of her father, but the walls were closing in. The debts were maturing. The private equity lenders, the ones connected to Mr. Thorne, were demanding a balloon payment. That is why she needed the inheritance. She needed to liquidate Annabelle's share to pay off the predator who was sitting at her kitchen table. Meredith sat at the defense table, her head in her hands. The illusion of her wealth was gone. The perfect clothes, the house, the status. It was all a costume she had rented with money she didn't have. She wasn't the rich sister. She was the destitute one. Then came the final blow. Judge Calloway turned to the back of the trust document, the original one my father had written. There is a clause here, Calloway said. Section 9, paragraph C, the clean hands provision. He looked at the lawyers. It states that if any beneficiary is found by a court of competent jurisdiction to have committed fraud against the estate, their beneficial interest is not merely forfeited, it is redirected, and the governance of the trust, the power to appoint trustees and manage assets, transfers immediately to an independent fiduciary appointed by the court. He looked at Meredith. Ms. Bell, by finding you compliant in this fraud, I am not just taking your money, I am stripping you of all control. You will have no say in the legacy of Robert Bell. You will have no vote. You will have no seat at the table. Meredith looked up. Her eyes were red, rimmed with dark circles. You can't do that, she whispered. I can. And I am. Calloway said. Meredith stood up. It wasn't a graceful motion. She knocked her chair over. It's mine, she screamed. The sound was raw, tearing through the quiet of the sealed room. I built it. I kept his name clean. I went to the dinners. I shook the hands. She turned to me. She pointed a finger that shook violently. You, she shrieked. You think you won. You were born wrong. Anna, you were always the mistake. Dad knew it. That's why he let me handle everything. That's why he let me fix you, Meredith. Stop, Hartz pleaded, trying to grab her arm. Get off me. Meredith shoved him away. She was unraveling completely. He had to choose. She yelled at me, tears streaming down her face. He had to choose who would survive. And he chose me. He chose me until you ruined it. You ruin everything you touch. You should have stayed gone. I looked at her. I didn't see a monster. I saw a terrified little girl who had been taught that love was conditional, that status was survival, and that the only way to be safe was to be on top. My father hadn't just failed me. He had failed her, too. He had let her believe that the family name was worth more than her soul. Meredith collapsed into her chair, sobbing. It was a jagged, ugly sound. The judge banged his gavel, but he didn't look angry anymore. He looked sad. The hearing ended at 4 o'clock. The judge ordered Elias Thorne into custody for contempt and perjury. Pending federal charges, Meredith was released on her own recognizance, but with an ankle monitor, as the bailiffs were clearing the room. Julian Kincaid walked over to my table. He didn't congratulate me. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. This was in the safe deposit box. Kincaid said, "The real one, the one your father kept at a bank in the next county, which Meredith didn't know about." He handed it to me. It was addressed to Anna. I sat down on the bench and opened it. My hands were trembling. "My dearest Anna, if you are reading this, the audit worked, and it means I'm gone. I am sorry. I say that knowing it isn't enough. I was a weak man. Anna, I saw what Meredith was becoming. I saw the hunger in her, the need to be important, and I didn't stop it. I fed it. I let her take the reins because I was tired, and then, when I realized what she was doing, I was too afraid of the scandal to stop her. I knew she would come for you. I knew she would try to take what was yours. That is why I built the trap. It was the only way I could protect you without destroying the family while I was alive. That is a coward's logic, I know. But Anna, listen to me. You have the truth now. You have the name. But don't become us. Don't let the money turn you into someone who keeps score. Take what is yours and live. End the cycle. And one last thing. Be careful who you trust. The people who helped Meredith. They are part of a larger machine. I tried to cut the cords, but I don't know if I got them all. Love. Dad. I folded the letter. I felt a single tear slide down my cheek. He had loved me, in his broken, cowardly way. He had loved me enough to burn down his own legacy to save me. End the cycle. I stood up. I wiped my face. I put the letter in my bag next to the folder I had stolen from the house. Samuel was waiting for me by the door. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," I said. We walked out of the courtroom and into the lobby. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the world exploded. Flashes blinded me. Microphones were thrust into my face. The press had been waiting for hours, and the rumors of Thorne's arrest and Meredith's breakdown had leaked. "Ms. Bell, how do you feel about your sister's removal?" "Anna, is it true the estate is bankrupt? Ms. Bell, are you pressing criminal charges against your family?" I stopped on the steps of the courthouse. The cold afternoon air hit my face. I looked at the cameras. I saw the hungry eyes of the reporters, the same people who had printed Meredith's lies about me a week ago. They wanted a soundbite. They wanted anger. They wanted me to be the vengeful sister, the triumphant survivor who was ready to dance on the grave of the Bell dynasty. Samuel leaned in. "Do you want to make a statement?" "You don't have to." I looked at the microphones. I thought about what I had said to Hartz. I want the record. But the record was already written. The judge had signed the order. The truth was in the files. I didn't need to feed these people. I looked past the cameras, back toward the courthouse doors, through the glass, in the shadows of the vestibule. I saw Julian Kincaid. He wasn't alone. He was standing with a woman. She was tall, wearing a trench coat, her back to me. They were speaking quietly. Kincaid handed her a blue file. Not the red one he had given the judge. The woman turned slightly. I couldn't see her face, but I saw her profile. It was the intake nurse, the one who had called me when my father died, the one who had said, "I am calling regarding your father." Why was the fiduciary oversight officer talking to a nurse? A chill went down my spine. Be careful who you trust. Kincaid looked up. He saw me watching him. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just held my gaze for a second, his face unreadable, and then he turned and walked deeper into the courthouse, disappearing into the shadows with the woman, Ms. Bell. A reporter shouted. I turned back to the crowd. No comment. I said, I walked down the steps, past the cameras, past the noise. I found my silver sedan in the parking lot. I got in and locked the doors. I had won the war against Meredith, but as I watched the courthouse in my rearview mirror, I realized that the war against the machine, the one my father had warned me about, the one Kincaid represented, was just beginning. I put the car in drive. I wasn't going back to the supply room. I had work to do. The final day of the hearing in Marrow County Probate Court did not feel like a legal proceeding. It felt like an autopsy. The patient the Bell Family Trust was dead, lying open on the table, and we were all just standing around staring at the disease that had killed it. The courtroom was packed, but it was a different kind of crowd than before. The gossip seekers and the neighbors were gone, replaced by serious men in gray suits who took notes in leather-bound folios. These were the regulators, the state auditors, the vultures who circle when a wealthy family finally bleeds out in public. I sat at the table with Samuel Levi. He didn't look triumphant. He looked tired. We had spent the last 48 hours reviewing the documents Julian Kincaid had seized from Elias Thorne's laptop, and what we found was enough to make you lose faith in everything. Judge Calloway entered. He moved with a grim efficiency. There was no banter, no patience for procedural delays. He sat down, adjusted his robe, and looked at the defense table. Meredith was there. She wore a gray cardigan that looked too big for her. She wasn't wearing makeup. The ankle monitor on her leg bulged beneath her slacks. She stared at the wood grain of the table as if reading a map to a place she could never go back to. Elias Thorne was absent. He was currently being held in the county detention center, awaiting federal arraignment, but his presence hung over the room like a gas leak. Judge Calloway banged his gavel once. It was a dull thud. "We are back on the record," Calloway said. "This court is prepared to hear final arguments regarding the validity of the will contest and the motion for fiduciary removal. However, before counsel speaks, the court admits into evidence the supplemental report from the Fiduciary Oversight Board." He nodded to Julian Kincaid, who stood near the bailiff's station. Kincaid remained the most terrifying person in the room because he was the only one who didn't seem to care who won. He only cared about the math. "Mr. Kincaid," Calloway said, "please summarize the finding regarding the intent of the fabricated evidence." Kincaid walked to the center of the room. He held a small digital remote. "Your Honor," Kincaid said, his voice flat and precise, "we have recovered a deleted audio file from the server of Mr. Thorne's consulting firm. It is a recording of a voice-over IP call dated 3 months ago. The participants are Elias Thorne and an individual identified by voice analysis as Meredith Bell." Meredith flinched. She didn't look up, but her shoulders hunched closer to her ears. "Play it," Calloway ordered. Kincaid pressed a button. The sound of static filled the courtroom, followed by the smooth, confident voice of Elias Thorne. "The problem isn't that she is estranged, Meredith. The problem is that she is sympathetic. If she goes to court looking like a victim, the judge will give her the benefit of the doubt. Then," Meredith's voice, it sounded shrill, panicked. "Then what do I do?" "She's stubborn. She won't take a payoff," Thorne's voice returned, cold and reptilian. "Then we change the optics. We need a paper trail that makes her look desperate. We need to create a narrative of financial addiction. Make Anna look hungry. Meredith, judges hate hungry women. They look like liabilities." The recording clicked off. The silence in the room was absolute. "Make Anna look hungry." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. It wasn't just a strategy. It was a dehumanization. They had discussed destroying my reputation the way exterminators discuss removing a nest of wasps. They didn't hate me. They just viewed me as an architectural problem to be solved. Judge Calloway looked at Meredith. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked disappointed, which was worse. "Ms. Bell," Calloway said softly, "did you agree with that assessment? Did you believe your sister was just a liability to be managed? Meredith didn't answer. Marcus Hartz, her attorney, stood up slowly. He looked like a man trying to stop a tidal wave with a paper umbrella. Your Honor, Hart said. His voice lacked its usual boom. The defense acknowledges the recording. However, we ask the court to consider the context of coercion. My client was under extreme financial duress. She was being advised by a professional predator. Mr. Thorne is a manipulator of the highest order. Meredith Bell was overwhelmed. She was misguided. But she was not the mastermind. She was a drowning woman reaching for a lifeline, and Mr. Thorne handed her a loaded gun instead. Hartz gestured to Meredith, who was now weeping silently. Look at her, Hart said. This is not a criminal mastermind. This is a daughter who was terrified of losing her father's legacy. She made terrible choices. Yes, but she did not act with malice. She acted out of fear. Judge Calloway listened. He let Hartz finish his plea. He let the words hang in the air, trying to soften the hard edges of the facts. Then the judge leaned forward. Mr. Hartz, Calloway said, stress is a mitigation for a traffic accident. Stress is a mitigation for a shouting match. Stress is not a mitigation for a 6-month campaign of systematic forgery. The judge picked up a stack of papers. Your client didn't just listen to Mr. Thorne, Calloway continued. She executed the plan. She logged into the trust system. She authorized the transfers. She filed the petition in this court, swearing under oath that her sister was a manipulator, all while knowing that she herself was the one pulling the strings. That is not being overwhelmed. That is being deliberate. He looked at Meredith. You wanted the estate, Ms. Bell. You wanted the status, and you were willing to destroy your sister's life to keep it. That is not fear. That is greed, and I will not allow this court to be used as a tool for it. Meredith buried her face in her hands. The judge straightened his papers. He looked out at the room. I am ready to rule. Samuel Levi nudged my leg under the table. This is it, he whispered. The petitioner's challenge to the last will and testament of Robert Bell is denied with prejudice. Calloway ruled. The court finds that the allegations of undue influence against Anna Bell are not only unsubstantiated, but were fabricated through a criminal conspiracy. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was done. It was official. Furthermore, Calloway said, the court finds that Meredith Bell has breached her fiduciary duty as trustee. She is hereby removed from all roles regarding the Bell Family Trust. She is stripped of her beneficial interest in the estate, pursuant to the fraud clause in the trust document. The gavel banged. However, Calloway added, his eyes hard, this is a probate court. My jurisdiction ends at the distribution of assets. I am referring the findings of this hearing, specifically the evidence of forgery, wire fraud, and perjury, to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation. Meredith Bell, you are to remain on electronic monitoring until the DA determines the charges. He turned to me. Ms. Bell, Calloway said. His voice softened. You are the sole remaining beneficiary. The court recognizes you as the rightful heir to the Bell estate. The record will reflect that you have been exonerated of all claims. The trust is yours, subject to the appointment of a new, independent trustee to oversee the transition. I nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. I said, my voice sounded small in the large room. Court is adjourned, Calloway said. The gavel came down one last time. It was a sharp, final sound. I sat there as the room erupted into motion. Lawyers were packing bags. The regulators were talking on cell phones. The bailiff was moving toward Meredith to escort her out. I had won. I had the money. I had the house. I had the vindication. But I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel like pumping my fist in the air. I felt a heavy, crushing exhaustion. I looked at Meredith being led away. Her head bowed, and I just felt grief. My family was gone. My father was dead. My sister was a criminal. And I was alone in a room full of strangers who only cared about the paperwork. This was the victory. It tasted like ash. Samuel Levi squeezed my shoulder. I have to file the order with the clerk. He said, "Wait here. I'll bring the car around back so we can avoid the press." I nodded and watched him go. I sat on the bench, staring at the empty judge's stand. Ms. Bell. I looked up. Julian Kincaid was standing at the end of the table. He still had his briefcase. He still looked like he hadn't slept, or smiled, in 10 years. "Mr. Kincaid," I said, "thank you. For the recording." He didn't acknowledge the thanks. He walked over and sat in the chair Samuel had vacated. He placed his briefcase on the table and opened it just an inch. "We need to talk," he said. "Off the record." I frowned. "The hearing is over. The hearing is over." Kincaid agreed. "The audit is not—" He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a flowchart of money. I recognized the names Meredith, Thorne, the shell companies, but there was a red line leading off the edge of the page, pointing to a box that was labeled simply "Unknown Entity." "What is this?" I asked. "We traced the money Meredith stole," Kincaid said. "We found the payments to Thorne. We found the payments to the private equity sharks. But there is a gap. A gap. About 12% of the total outflow," Kincaid said, "roughly $400,000 over the last 3 years. It didn't go to Meredith's debts. It didn't go to Thorne. It went into a blind account in the Cayman Islands. Maybe Meredith was stashing it." I said, "For a rainy day. That's what we thought," Kincaid said. "But we checked the access logs. Meredith didn't authorize those transfers. Neither did Thorne." I stared at him. "Then who did?" Kincaid looked around the empty courtroom to make sure we were alone. "The authorization code used for those transfers belongs to a system administrator," he said. "It's a root-level access key. It overrides the trustee. It overrides the bank. It is hard-coded into the trust's architecture." "My father," I asked. "Your father is dead," Kincaid said, but the transfers continued. "The last one was 3 days ago. While we were in this courtroom, my blood ran cold." "Someone is still inside the system," I whispered. Kincaid nodded. "Thorne was a consultant. He was a hired gun. But he wasn't the architect. Someone built the back door that Thorne used. Someone set up the shell companies before Meredith even knew she was in trouble." He slid the paper closer to me. "We think there is a silent partner," Kincaid said. "Someone embedded deep in the administration of the estate. Maybe at the bank. Maybe at the law firm. Maybe someone we haven't even met yet." He looked at me with intensity. "Here is the problem. Anna, now that you are the sole beneficiary, that money is technically being stolen from you. If we pursue it, if we try to trace that 12%, we have to keep the estate in lockdown. We have to freeze your assets. We have to depose everyone who ever worked for your father. It could take years, and whoever is on the other end of that transfer, they will know we are coming. And if we don't," I asked. "If we don't," Kincaid said, "I sign the release forms today. You get your inheritance. The money is yours. You walk away with millions of dollars, and you just accept that there is a leak in the boat. You accept that someone, somewhere, is taking a cut." He leaned back. "It's a choice. Ms. Bell, do you want the money, or do you want the truth? Because in my experience, you rarely get to keep both." I looked at the red line on the paper. Unknown entity. It wasn't just money, it was access. If someone had root access, they could see everything I did. They could see where I lived. They could see what I bought. I would be rich, but I would be living in a glass house, watched by an invisible landlord. But if I fought— I looked at Kincaid. "Who was the woman?" I asked. He blinked. "What, yesterday?" I said, "On the courthouse steps. You were talking to a woman. She was the intake nurse who called me when my father died." Why was the Fiduciary Oversight Board talking to a nurse? Kincaid went very still. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something behind his eyes. Respect, or maybe caution. "She isn't a nurse," Kincaid said quietly. "She is an analyst for the Treasury Department." "Treasury," I said. "Why is the Treasury involved in a family trust?" "Because," Kincaid said, "we suspect your father wasn't just hiding his own money. We think he was holding money for other people who don't use banks." The room seemed to spin. My father? The boring businessman. The alcoholic. Was he washing money? Was that why he was so terrified? Was that why he built the trap, not just to catch Meredith, but to blow up the whole operation and free himself? I realized then how little I knew. I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the fog was just starting to clear. I can't live with a ghost in the machine, I said. Kincaid nodded slowly. I didn't think so. I want to find them, I said. Then don't sign the settlement papers. Kincaid said. Sign the authorization for a Stage 5 audit. It gives us permission to tear the trust down to the studs. It means you won't see a dime for at least a year. It means you will be deposed. It means you will be a target. I'll sign it, I said. Kincaid reached into his briefcase and pulled out a blue folder. He laid it on the table. Read it first, he said. Once you sign this, there's no going back. The investigation becomes federal. I put my hand on the folder. It felt heavy. I needed to see her. One last time. I found Meredith in the holding cell in the basement of the courthouse. She was waiting for her husband to post bail. She was sitting on a metal bench, staring at the concrete floor. When the guard let me in, she didn't look up. You came to gloat, she asked. Her voice was raspy. No, I said. I stood on the other side of the bars. I'm signing a Stage 5 audit, I said. Meredith's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide. No, she whispered. Anna, don't. Why, I asked. Because it will expose more of your debts. No. Meredith stood up and rushed to the bars. She gripped the cold steel. You don't understand. It's not about me anymore. Thorne was just the middleman. Middleman for who I asked. Meredith looked over her shoulder. Terrified. Dad didn't just borrow from banks. Anna, he made deals. He made deals to keep the company afloat 10 years ago. He let people move money through the trust. That's why the structure is so complex. That's why the system administrator exists. Who are they, I asked. I don't know names, Meredith said, tears streaming down her face. I just know that every month, a payment goes out, and if the payment stops, if you freeze the accounts. She swallowed hard. They won't sue you. Anna, they aren't lawyers. They remove problems. She reached through the bars and grabbed my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. Please, she begged, just take the money. Take the inheritance and let the leak continue. Pay the toll. If you expose the deeper channel, you won't just ruin me, you'll get us both killed. I looked at my sister. For the first time, I realized that her greed hadn't just been about vanity, it had been about survival. She had been feeding the beast to keep it from eating us, and now I was about to starve it. I pulled my hand away. I can't live in fear. Meredith, I said, Dad tried to stop it. That's why he wrote the letter. That's why he wanted the audit. Dad is dead. Meredith screamed. Doesn't that tell you something? I stepped back. I'm sorry. Meredith, I'm going to finish it. I turned around. Anna. She screamed after me. Anna, don't do it. I walked down the concrete corridor, her screams echoing off the walls. Don't do it. Don't do it. I walked out of the holding area and back up to the lobby. Samuel was waiting with the car keys. Kincaid was waiting with the blue folder. The reporters were still outside, prowling like wolves. I looked at the blue folder on the table. If I signed it, I was choosing a war against invisible enemies, against money launderers, against the people who had terrified my father into an early grave. I would be broke for another year. I would be watched. I would be in danger. But if I didn't sign it, I would be Meredith. I would be rich, and I would be a slave. I would be paying a ransom for the rest of my life, pretending I was free. I picked up the pen. The image of the man in the black suit Kincaid watching me was burned into my mind. He wasn't the hero. He was just the man holding the flashlight. I was the one who had to walk into the dark. I thought about the supply room at the city parks department, the safety of the boredom, the smell of the cedar mulch invoices. That life was gone. It had burned up the moment the phone rang. I looked at Kincaid. Do you have a pen? I asked. Even though I was holding one, I just needed to hear my own voice. I needed to know it was steady. He pointed to the one in my hand. I looked down at the paper. Authorization for Stage 5 forensic examination. I pressed the pen to the paper. The ink flowed black and permanent. Anna Bell. I closed the folder and handed it to Kincaid. He took it. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He just slipped it into his briefcase and clicked the lock shut. "We will be in touch. Ms. Bell," he said. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Samuel walked up to me. "Ready to go home?" he asked. I looked at the heavy oak doors leading to the outside world. The sun was setting. The shadows were getting long. "No," I said. "I don't think I have a home anymore. Samuel." I pushed open the doors and stepped out into the blinding flash of the cameras. I didn't look down. I looked straight ahead, into the glare, ready for whatever was coming next. Someone was watching. I knew that now. But I was watching back. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the shadows of the Bell family, from the quiet humiliation of the supply room to the cold, hard light of the truth. We walked with Anna as she peeled back the layers of deception, finding that the rot went deeper than she ever imagined. I would love to hear your thoughts on Anna's final choice. Did she make the right decision to sign the audit, or should she have taken the money and run? And who do you think is the system administrator? Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I am always amazed to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this winding road of legal thrillers and family secrets, please consider subscribing to Revenge Stories. There are many more secrets to uncover, and many more scores to settle. Until next time, keep your eyes open. You never know who is watching.